Last week we started going over Demas, the silver mine, and then we stopped before we got to Lot's wife. Right? Okay. So let's just kind of pick up there. And the theme here largely has been this idea of coveting. Buy-ins, we talked about buy-ins, and then we talked about Demas and the silver mine, and now we're going to talk about Lot's wife. They all have this idea of coveting. Now, the idea of coveting is most often associated with money. Right, so we tend to think of it coveting as I want more of money, I want more of something, but really it's just anything. And we notice these situations starting to come, especially as we get older, and things are getting harder. We're maybe getting a little bit slower. We're kind of ramping down a little bit, and the idea of coveting starts to become even more passionate in some ways. It's almost more desperate. Well, that's kind of our situation with these pilgrims. They've gone, they've walked, they've battled, and now they get to Demas, and Demas calls to them to have this silver mine, and they like it. They want it. There's obviously the desire for wealth, just to be comfortable, but they don't leave the path. Right? We talked about that, how this mine was dangerous, and you're going to fall in. And we saw Bian's go, and nobody ever heard from him and his companions again because they got lost in this maze of wealth. So what we want to talk about today is Lot's wife. If we have time, we're going to get into the River of God and Bypath Meadow, because they all fit together. Okay? They're all the idea of wanting what we can't have, wanting what God hasn't actually authorized us, wanting what we think will make us happy, only to find out that, well, it didn't. Okay. Now, we're on page 9. Now I saw that, just on the other side of this plain, the pilgrims came to a place where stood an old monument, hard by the highway side, at the sight of which they were both concerned because of the strangeness of the form thereof, for it seemed to them as if it had been a woman transformed into the shape of a pillar. Here therefore they stood looking and looking upon it, but could not for a time tell what they should make thereof. Now, this is hard by the side of the plain. Now, this is important, because remember what happened to the silver mine. The silver mine was off of the path. Okay, it was over a little bit off the distance, so you'd have to get off the path to go. This is right on the path. Okay, that's the difference. While they stopped to look at this, it's not like the silver mine where they had to divert to be able to get there. This is right there for them to look at. So they stood. It was a picture of a woman, and she's been turned into a pillar. At last Hopeful spied written above the head thereof in writing an unusual hand. But he, being no scholar, called a Christian, for he was learned, to see if he could pick out the meaning. So he came, and after a little laying of letters together, he found the same to be this: remember Lot's wife. Now this is kind of interesting. So they look at this statue, and they can't figure out what the statue is. So Bunyan spends a lot of time going through and talking about how they had to figure out what the statue is, and they had to look for an inscription. There had to be some kind of description. Now notice what they didn't do. Did they start to speculate? Okay, that's important, because speculation a lot of times relies on us and our wisdom. Now that's not necessarily bad. We do that all the time, right? And there's a lot of situations where we should. The Bible doesn't really tell us about every possible scenario of life. It gives us principles and commands and understanding that we then apply in our own wisdom to the situations that God brings us to for specifics. So these guys, though, they look at this, but they don't make that speculation. They don't guess at what they think it might be. They keep investigating it until they can figure out where they're going to get it. And then they find an inscription that's written in a strange hand, because really what it is the Word of God, right? Remember Lot's wife is from Luke. And is Jesus telling, beware of covetousness, remember Lot's wife. And they find the statue. Now, Hopeful says, I don't know what that means, and so he turns to Christian. Now, what does that tell you a little bit about Hopeful character? There's a humility, right? There's a humility that says, I don't get it. Christian, can you help me out? How many of us do that on a regular basis? Versus the opposite, which is, I'm going to hammer my head against a wall until I figure out a way through. Right? What else does that tell you about Hopeful? humble.
He knows where to go.
Good.
Ask the question.
Yep.
Doesn't ask the
Yep. Absolutely. That's really important, right? As we'll see in a second, is that maturity that Christian has about him. Hopeful knows that he acknowledges that he turns to Christian, and Christian is responsible for then teaching hopeful. Okay? Keep that in mind as we get into Bypath Meadow. Now, notice the simplicity of hopeful. I don't get it. I hear the description, but I don't understand it. Let me go find instruction. There's a humility about it, but there's also a simplicity. I don't get it. I should just go find help. Right? It's just, there's a blessedness to not sitting there and trying to make everything a drama play. There's a simplicity about just asking for help and not having to go through hundreds of things. Talk yourself into it. Try 5 times before you go ask for help. That's not Hopeful's character. He's very simple. He just grabs what God gives him and then looks for God's guidance upon what God brings into his life. Does that make sense? That's a big deal, and we'll find out that out near the end of the book. As they're crossing the river of God, Christian struggles. Hopeful has absolutely no issues whatsoever, because Hopeful just very simple. I see the prize, and we're going towards it, and that's it. And that buoys him, because he doesn't get weighed down by all the cares of the world and all the things that we tend to make up in our own minds. Right? Spurgeon said if we would just worry about the actual things of our life, we would probably cut down most of our stress by 90%. Right? That's my paraphrase. He said it much better. All right. So he asked for help. This is Lot's wife. Now tell me about Lot's wife. What do you guys remember about Lot's wife? Why does she get her 5 minutes of fame in all the wrong contexts? Yeah. Yeah. That's true. Okay. Well, let's go back a little bit further than that. Abraham and Lot.
Righteous people that were Abraham said, "Will you save
Good.
the town and make people in?"
Go back further. Abraham and Lot had too many of everything. So they said, we got to separate. Okay? So these two separate, and one goes one way and one goes the other, right? And that was a big deal, because who decided which way they're going to go? Lot. Abraham, exactly. Abraham took himself and was humble enough to say, Lot, you make the decision, I'll go whichever direction you don't. So Lot looks around and he finds this place called Sodom. Now Sodom was in this valley, incredibly fertile valley. Now, if you're in an agrarian society and there's this incredibly fertile valley, what have you found? Yeah, yeah. You found the equivalent of that silver mine. You see how this is tying together? So here's this gorgeous area where there grows anything and everything. And he goes and he settles in Sodom. Now, even at that time, there was indications that Sodom was already known to be a place of depravity. It was already known that this place was bad news. So when Lot made that decision, was it good or bad? It was a bad decision to begin with. Okay?
There was probably a pride that I can
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm sure there was a pride, and there was also this chance of quick wealth. I mean, I can go down there and we can have anything we want to. We just have to keep our principles. Right, honey? We're just going to keep our principles. Right? Kids, we are not going to give in to the society, but we are going to live in it. Okay? So they go and they plant themselves in there. And that's where you guys started picking up. And all of a sudden, now God sees Sodom and says he's tired of this. Now, this goes on for hundreds of years. Sodom is not like this, just it popped up. It's not like the Burning Man Festival in Nevada that comes up every once a month, right? It's or 1 month of a year. This has been there for hundreds of years, getting worse and worse and worse. And God has allowed this to go on for a number of years. And finally, he says, you know what? Enough's enough. It's time to punish the sin. My forgiveness has lasted long enough. It is now time for judgment. In God's wisdom, in God's timing, on his decision based on everything he knows and everything else, that is the moment where he decides now's the time. Right? And so Abraham comes and says, well, you know, God, what about the righteous people that are in there? And he keeps asking these questions. Well, what if there's 100? Okay, well, what if there's 10? Well, what if there's 1? So you can kind of see Abraham's standard just keeps lowering down, right? What are my chances I'm going to find 10 people in there that are righteous? Okay, what about, right? Yeah, that's all he cares about. Right. And he knows that this is the Strip in Las Vegas, right? This is the equivalent of is this a bad place? Let me get myself in trouble if I keep trying to speculate. It's a bad place to go. And so he's hoping to get Lot out of Sodom, right? This is the uncle's care for his nephew. So he argues, hopes, asks, and God relents, which is really interesting because if there's one righteous person in Sodom, I will relent, right? Now, who knows how many righteous people are in Sodom? That's kind of an interesting one, right? Abraham is it's a very human argument that he keeps making with the God of the universe who knows all things, and God entertains him in that. If you look at it, it's almost funny, the interaction. Sure, Lot, or sure, Abraham, whatever you want. What about this one? All right, there's 10. That's cool. I already know the answer to this question, right? It's like when you're dealing with your kids and they're trying to bargain and you already know what the answer is, and you're just going back and forth to entertain them because it's actually funny. You got a video running. You're going to get $10,000 out of it. So that's what you keep doing, that, right? So, anyways, he sends angels into Sodom. They find Lot, and they tell Lot to leave. Now, what does Lot try to do? He tries to actually appease the people. That doesn't work. So finally he says, you guys got to leave. Okay? So his children turn him down. He takes his wife and a few of his daughters, I think, and they start coming out of the... Now, this is in a plain, so they're coming actually up a mountain as they come up. Okay? At that time then, as they're coming out, there's one command given to... Well, I guess two commands. One is keep walking. And what's the other command? Now, that look back is an interesting command. Why would they be tempted to look back? Okay, they're leaving behind other stuff. Now, is there any... you got brimstone raining down from heaven. You've got lightning and fire and everything else. What is... there's the actual just wanting to look because this is a spectacle, right? You're not going to see this ever again. I just want to take a kind of go look at it. So is that what God's trying to say? I don't want you to look at it. It'll hurt your eyes. It's not like looking at the eclipse or whatever, right? He didn't want them to look because they left their stuff behind, but keep going. Okay. He wants obedience. But why the specific command? Okay. Does that make more sense? This is why Lot's wife turned around and was immediately turned into a pillar of salt. She was supposed to be obedient. She had really one command: just don't look back. Okay? But what she looked back was not because she wanted to see what was actually taking place. She looked back longingly. She looked back because she missed it. She cared about it. She wanted to go back. This was her livelihood. These were the people she knew. This was the lifestyle she had. So the violation here is not specifically the looking back because she wanted to see. The violation was looking back because she cared too much. Because she wanted one foot in this world. Yep. Right. So she lost family. She lost friends. But the thing is when you look back, there's nothing wrong with caring about people. There's nothing wrong with caring about those friends. The difference was, here's God telling you, here's what you need to do. And you willingly turned back because that meant more to you than what God said. Does that make sense? So that was really the issue with Lot's wife, is she could not properly put those people in the right place. God was not her all. She was following him because he said to do it, but she ultimately thought they were more important. She didn't put God's commands, his character, her obedience to him first and foremost. Make sense? Now, this is where it also gets interesting. the cultural way in which they walked would have been men up front with women and children in the back. So when she turned to look and turned into a pillar of salt, when would Lot have found that out? And then he turns around and starts doing the attendance. And he finds out she never made it. Okay? So, Bunyan, actually a comment on that thing. I have sometimes wondered at Lot in this particular. His wife looked behind her and died immediately, but let what would become of her, Lot would not so much as look behind him to see her, which he would have never known, to be honest with you. We do not read that he did so much once look where she was, or what was become of her. His heart was indeed upon his journey, and well it might. There was the mountain before him, and the fire and brimstone behind him. His life lay at stake, and he hath lost it, if he had but looked behind him. So he kept walking, not stopping, and there's no record of him being kind of like Aaron, when Nadab and Abihu were burned with fire. They understood. There was sadness, but they understood that this was judgment from God, righteous judgment. Okay? So that's Lot's wife. She's standing. So he read it to his fellow, after which they both concluded that this was the pillar of salt into which Lot's wife was turned. For her looking back with a covetous heart, when she was going from Sodom for safety, which sudden and amazing sight gave them occasion to discourse. So Christian says this: Ah, my brother, this is a seasonable sight. It came opportunely to us after the invitation which Demas gave us to come over to view the hill Lucre. And had we gone over as he desired us, and thou wast inclining to do, my brother, we had, for aught I know, been made ourselves like this woman, a spectacle to those that shall come after and behold. I am sorry that I was so foolish, and am made to wonder that I am not now as Lot's wife. For wherein was the difference betwixt her sin and mine? She only looked back, but I had a desire to go see. Let grace be adorned, and let me be ashamed, that ever such a thing should be in mine heart. So she stands there, and she's literally looking back at the silver mine. Okay? So what's Bunyan trying to communicate? Because this is kind of an interesting sequence, right? They got to the silver mine, rejected Demas in the silver mine, they keep walking, and then they hit the statue that was doing what? Right. Temporary obedience is not necessarily obedience. Right? So as you keep walking, she stops and looks, and what could they have done? They could have gone back, or they could have looked back. But when we look back, using Lot's wife as the context, what would looking back be equivalent to?
It affects you.
It affects you. You keep walking, but all the while, what are you doing? Thinking about that silver mine. Wondering if I should have gone. Maybe there's another one. Maybe I'll find something else. I should have stayed. That silver mine would have been great. I wish I could have got that. I wish I could have got this. So you seem to be walking forward, but what are you doing the whole time? Your heart is back there. And that's exactly what happened with Lot's wife, right? Her heart was still in Sodom, even though she was walking away. And that's what her looking back had demonstrated. Where was her treasure? Well, her treasure was still in Sodom. Whether it be the people, or the things, the lifestyle, whatever it was, her heart was still in Sodom after God said, this is a sinful place, I'm going to destroy it. Come to me to where I'm taking you. Go to the place that I have in store for you. Trust me in all things. But her heart was back there, and she couldn't help but look back. Same thing here. You can keep walking saying that you were so inclined to go to God, but all the while what you're holding on to is family, is jobs, is, whatever. Fill in your earthly life. It doesn't have to be lucre. It doesn't have to be something heinous. Where is your treasure? What are you walking towards? Do we walk with one eye looking back? Right? We talked about buy-ins. Remember one of his relations was Mr. Looking Both Ways? Is that what we're doing? Or do we move forward 100%? Okay? So hopeful ruse the fact that he was that guy. He says, what's the difference between her and me? She looked back, but I actually was willing to go off the path to see it. and yet here I stand and I'm still alive, and she is a pillar of salt. So this is where he lands, and this is really important. Let grace be adored, and let me be ashamed that ever such a thing should be in mine heart. So where did Hopeful land as he realizes the sin of having a divided attention? God's grace, the gospel. Always the answer. Because we will have those moments where we look back. We will have those moments where we can't let go of whatever that idol is. But God's forgiveness extends even there. And so we continue to walk. He repents and he walks. Christian says, let us take notice of what we see here for our help for time to come. This woman escaped one judgment, for she fell not by the destruction of Sodom, yet she was destroyed by another. As we see, she is turned into a pillar of salt. By itself is a great lesson. Right? She avoided the destruction of Sodom, yet she was destroyed by another. Hopeful says, true, and she may be to us both caution and example. Caution that we should shun her sin, or a sign of what judgment will overtake us. As such, will not be prevented by this caution. So Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, with the 250 men that perished in their sin, did also become a sign or example of others to beware. But above all, I muse at one thing, to wit, how Demas and his fellows can stand so confidently yonder to look for that treasure, which this woman, but for looking behind her. Well, before we go there, Korah, Dathan, Abiram, and the 250 men. That's one of the most fascinating stories I find for some reason in the Bible. Do you guys remember who Korah is? Korah's rebellion. He was against Moses and Aaron. Right. Now, they were burning incense. The 250 men were actually burning incense. So that kind of tells you, that kind of puts it into a little more of a perspective. The emphasis on that passage is on worship. Okay? So when Korah led a rebellion, he basically was complaining about how to worship Yahweh. Okay? Now, at that point in Israel's history, who determined how to worship Yahweh? Huh? God did. Very specifically, God did, right? Who established all the parameters for that tabernacle? Who put Aaron as high priest? Who gave tablets of stone and all the other things? This is a very specific example. We're not talking a generation later where you had to remember. These are people that saw the fire on the mountain, everything else. This is Korah. Okay? But now what's Korah's argument? It doesn't say, but let's just speculate. What is Korah's argument against Moses and Aaron? Good. Because we are all... We're all God's people. Why is he so special? And so he's basically making a movement that says, why should we worship the way you tell us when we can all figure out how to worship ourselves? And so Moses, impressively, does not just rail on the guy. Did you not see what happened when I came down? Do you remember that veil I had to wear because my face was burning, glowing so brightly? Did that not give you a hint of what we went through? So he comes down and he says, all right, let's let God decide. And this is what it says in Numbers. Now it came to pass, as he finished speaking all these words, that the ground split apart under them, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up with their households and all the men with Korah and all their goods. So they and all those with them went down alive into the pit. The earth closed over them, and they perished from among the assembly. Then all Israel who were around them fled at their cry, for they said, lest the earth should swallow us up also, which is a problem. And a fire came out from the Lord and consumed 250 men that were offering incense. So, which I find to be the most fascinating, one of the most fascinating geological events. The earth opens up, they all go into it, and then the earth closes again over them. So this isn't just an earthquake where they just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The ground closed up back over them. It's an Indiana Jones plot. That's what it is. Like they fall in and it closes back over them. And then what this is... and then fire comes out and burns these other guys that are just sitting there holding the little stands with the incense burning so that they can do this. So the fact that it's incense indicates worship. So all these people were saying, this is how we should worship. Korah is telling us how we should worship. And most likely he's taken some kind of pagan practice from around Israel and saying, this is how it should be done. And God says, let me put my stamp on this. Let me just tell you how much I reject that. And he just fries them right there. 250 men all at once, fire coming from out of nowhere, like that. Likely it was a Nadab and Abihu, which means they're all standing around the tabernacle, and this fire comes out from the tabernacle and just very Raiders of the Lost Ark-ish, just fries them right there, right? And they're all, the thing is, the other ones fell to the ground and were covered up. They all walked back into this tabernacle and found 250 fried corpses. So just to put a little punctuation mark on what I think about this, they got to take all those dead bodies out, bury them, and then they had to go through ritual of purification because they touched like dead bodies. You see that the lessons that just kind of start stacking. And what's really indicative is 34. Then all Israel who were around them fled at their cry, for they said, lest the earth swallow us up also. What does that tell you about Israel? Faithless, faithless, faithless. Why were they swallowed up? Right. So if you trust the Lord, what do you have to fear? Nothing. Did Israel get it? No. What if he gets us too? What if we all accidentally fall in too? What if God makes a mistake? Is God vengeful? Is he like all the other pagan deities around us? That what if he can't control himself, and so he just gets so out of control that he starts killing all of us too, even though it was Korah? That's their thinking pattern. That's Israel's thinking pattern. That's why they struggled. The golden calf, everything else, because they couldn't figure it out. So the Korah, on the other hand, is just the one that's willing to stand up and take a stand, and God lets them know exactly what he thought about that stand. Now, did that stop Israel from sinning? Of course not. We already see that in history. But now here we have the same example of how Korah was destroyed. Israel has to go pick up 250 dead, fried corpses and everything else. And here in the same situation, here's Lot's wife standing there pointing at the silver mine within sight of Demas. And everybody that goes to Demas's mine can see this statue pointing at them, and yet they say, that's not important. That's not going to happen. I'll be careful. Right? I'll be okay. And so they're all looking at it, and it says here, as Hofel points out, for we read that she stepped not 1 foot out of the way. So as she walks, it doesn't say that she turned around to go back. It doesn't say that she even stopped to look. She just turned around to look while she was walking, and she got turned. Right? So it was a very seemingly small incursion, but it was the act that showed the heart. And it was the heart that was judged. So she was turning to a pillar of salt, especially since the judgment which overtook her did make her an example within sight of where they are. For they cannot but choose to see her, did they but lift up their eyes. Christian says, it is a thing to be wondered at, and it argueth that their hearts are grown desperate in the case. I cannot tell who to compare them to so fitly as to them that pick pockets in the presence of the judge, or they that will out purses under the gallows. Okay, what are the gallows? Yeah. When they used to do public hangings, the gallows were where the person was hanged. Now, he has two things. One is pickpockets in the presence of a judge, or those that will out purses or steal purses under the gallows. Yep. So the idea was everybody would gather together for the public execution. And they all have kind of those money bags or whatever hanging by their belt. And so as all these people are crowding around, the idea was people are coming up and either pickpocketing right in the middle of this judgment, or they were just going around with a knife and they just kind of get up close like they're paying attention and then just snip the leather strings off the bag and then take the bag and out you go, right? Same thing happens today. That's why whenever I go to New York City or somewhere where it's going to be crowded, I always take my wallet and put it somewhere up front because it's harder for them to notice. Otherwise, they just kind of crowd you and grab something and you kind of think, oh, they just bumped me, right? That's the idea. Same thing happens here. But the situation that Bunyan's pointing out is here they are, judgment's taking place. This man's dying for a crime. Judgment is actually being executed right in front of them, and yet there are people that are willing to ignore exactly what's being said of crime and wrong and sin, and they'll go ahead and commit a crime right in the middle of that. Right? It's like perjury. Here's the court. Here's where they're supposed to have truth and justice upheld, and yet you're willing to lie in the middle of all of these things. Right? And that's the idea here. You have someone who's so, hardened to the possibility of judgment that they're willing to go ahead and fulfill their desires anywhere they go. Ken Pohl says this: all the judgments on Sodom and Gomorrah, on the sons of Korah, on Lot's wife, are warnings to us to take the wrath of God seriously. Every display of God's wrath is a call to us to turn away from sin and come to Christ for mercy, forgiveness, wisdom, and righteousness. The warnings are clear, placed along our path so we cannot avoid seeing them, yet too often we ignore or discount them. The pillar stands within sight of the mind. The consequences of sin stare us in the face, yet even with God's warning so close at hand, we wander off the path with trifle with sin. God's blessings are equally clear. He sustains us. He gives us every breath. His gracious provisions are all around us. Yet even in the midst of blessing, we ignore God's kindness and go our way. Sodom sat in a valley that was ridiculously fertile. And yet what happened to the people? It's not thankfulness. It's the law of entropy. Everything goes towards chaos. We go towards sin. We will find our way to be rid of God one way or another, if it's not for God's grace to pull us back. But once we discover God's grace, we need to cling to it. We keep coming back to it. And all these warnings, there's just as many great things. There's heaven before us, and now there's a pillar of salt telling us what's behind us. Both of those things work together to keep pushing us forward. That makes sense. It is said of the men of Sodom that they were sinners exceedingly because they were sinners before the Lord, that is, in his eyesight, and notwithstanding the kindness that he had showed them, for the land of Sodom was now like the Garden of Eden heretofore. This, therefore, provoked him the more to jealousy, and made their plague as hot as the fire of the Lord out of heaven could make it. And it is most rationally to be concluded that such, even such as these, are, that shall sin in the sight, yea, and that too, in despite of such examples that are set continually before them, to caution them to the contrary, must be partakers of the severest judgment. So the more signs that are given to you, the more severe your judgment will be for ignoring them. Okay, that's one of the reasons why teachers are considered to be more to have this more stricter judgment. Partly because if I'm wrong and I tell you that, then you trust me because you all trust every word I say. That there's only something wrong, right? But partly also because I'm studying this out. God's given me more than I can teach. I'm learning a ton of other things. And for me to say, oh, I'm going to ignore all that and go do my own thing, right? That's even worse. The more you learn, the more you're accountable for. And so, therefore, teachers, but even for all of us, we sit in this church, the gospel is preached, hell is preached, judgment is preached, grace is put on display, the cross of Christ is put on display every week. We have communion ceremonies, we have baptisms, all those kind of things that help reinforce this picture of grace and God's forgiveness and transformation. The more you see that and you still turn away, that's just judgment. That's just judgment. Doubtless thou hast said the truth, this is what Hopeful says, but what a mercy it is that neither thou, and especially I, am not made myself this example. This ministereth occasion to us to thank God, to fear before him, and always to remember Lot's wife. All right, we got 15 minutes. So we are going to start the river of God. So the challenge is going to be this. Between the river of God and Bypath Meadow and the Giant, we have roughly 3 lessons between them all, which actually works out really well, but it doesn't break on note boundaries, so we're going to be crossing over notes as we go. So you can leave them here, they're not going to go anywhere. If you keep them online, that's fine too, but just so you know, we're going to be jumping the notes in between in the middle of classes, because it fits that way. Now, this is actually one of my favorite arcs in the book. I find it to be incredibly insightful, incredibly challenging, and some of the topics that we're going to bring up are just the way that he's laid it out. So we've already got this idea of coveting, which we've been building up. Buy-ins, hold the world, money, love, right? On one side, save all. and then they get into Demas and the silver mine, the chance to go get something. Now they hit Lot's wife, pointing back and say, what did you leave behind you? Have you left it behind you? Is the question that Lot's wife is pointing back to. And now they're going to get to the river of God. Well, that doesn't seem like it makes sense, but it will. So let's just read about it. I saw then that they went on their way to a pleasant river, which David the king called the river of God, and John the river of the water of life. So where's that coming from? That's coming from Psalm 65, Revelation 22, Ezekiel 47. They're all, the whole chapters, Bunyan's borrowing imagery from each of those pictures. Psalm 65, for example, says, you visit the earth and water it and greatly enrich it. The river of God is full of water. You provide their grain, and so you have prepared it. Now, and water is what makes this world work, to be quite honest with you. The earth is picked such that it's just the right distance from the sun that water can exist in a liquid form naturally, right? We have examples God's given us. There's Venus, which is closer, and it has a runaway greenhouse effect because it's too hot. CO2 and water vapor being insulative cause a runaway greenhouse effect. So everyone now we have carbon emissions, everything else, but water vapor is actually just as insulative. If you get enough water vapor in the atmosphere, it traps heat. Clouds are bad news for heat, right? So on one side is there, then there's Mars, which is just a little bit further away, and it cannot keep liquid water because it's too cold. And so you end up with Earth being right in the middle, perfectly placed astronomically to allow water to exist. Now why does that matter? Because water is pretty much the most basic element to most of the chemical processes that matter to life in our existence. Water is just kind of a given. Water is what we're all used to. It's almost a factor in every chemical experiment that matters. Some amount of water, right? So water is incredibly important. It fuels everything. It makes everything possible. And so here, yeah, random chance, baby. 96 million miles works out well. So here's water. It works everything. So then we look at the way crops grow and everything else. You see anything where you see a stream of water, a river of water, water flowing freely, readily available water is always looked at as a blessing. Rain coming, flooding the ground, whatever it is, and except for Noah, water is generally looked at as good news because it makes the world work, especially in the agrarian society that most of the Bible is written in. Okay? So you see this, the river of God is full of water. What happened when God's in the temple in Revelation? What springs from God's throne? Rivers of water, right? What was in Eden? 4 rivers of water. Everything else. So you see this repeatedly. Ezekiel 47, along the banks of the river and on this side and that grow all kinds of trees used for fruit. Their leaves will not wither and their fruit will not fail. They will bear fruit every month because their water flows from the sanctuary. Their fruit will be food and their leaves for medicine. So that water causes now the growth of plants, things that we will use, fruits and food and medicine and everything else, right? And then Revelation 22, and he showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding from the throne of God and of the Lamb. Clear as crystal is great. In the middle of its street, on either side of the river, was a tree of life, which bore 12 fruits, each tree yielding its fruit every month. The leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. Yielding its fruit every month. Why does that matter? Biologically, it doesn't happen. How many harvest seasons are there in a year? Generally 1. And yet these trees, every month. Sustaining life, not only just sustaining life, productively, overabundantly. That's the picture. This water is so pure, so perfect, that the biology that it creates, the fundamental growth periods of plants is actually altered. This gives you fruit every month. Fresh strawberries year-round, right? No out-of-season fruits where they're all hard and small and you taste them, you're like, ew, it still tastes like the outside of the plant, right? And like, if you ever had the orange where you bite into it and it tastes pretty much like the rind, That's the thing, right? Because it's an out-of-season fruit. They try to grow it in probably some greenhouse. It just doesn't work. And then you get the ones that are in season and they're juicy and good. And what's that?
Been shipped from Chile.
Yeah, it was picked green. It would sit on a refrigerated barge, and they kept it from getting any greener, but it lost all its flavor because it lost its nutrients, it lost its source. Okay. All right, so you guys get the picture of where Bunyan's going with this. This is where they end up. This is where they find. As they're walking, they find this river lining the path where they're going to go. So what is God providing for them? A blessing. It's a rich season of godliness. All the temptations are kind of abated for a while. All the lessons from the Word are just enriching. The fellowship is sweet, right? They don't have to worry about things because it's being provided for them, and the things that are being provided are the choicest members of things that they enjoy. Okay? They're able to heal up, they're able to relax, they're able to rest. Christian and his companion walked with great delight. They drank also of the water of the river, which was pleasant and enlivening to their weary spirits. Besides, on the banks of this river on either side were green trees that bore all manner of fruit. And the leaves of the trees were good for medicine, and with the fruit these trees were also much delighted. They were much delighted. And the leaves they eat to prevent surfeits and other diseases that are incident to those that heat their blood by travel. So that's a weird one. But the idea here, surfeits was the idea of, I gotta remember it because this one's a little bit weird. Surfeits is the older term that meant overindulgence. So the idea was you went into, a great picture of this, if you've seen Narnia, the movie, I don't know if it comes through in the book as much, but what did Edward want from the White Witch? Edmund. Turkish delight. What is Turkish delight? Ridiculously sugary, sweet, right? Something you should have like this much in, and she said, I'll give you all that you want. And he said, that's worth it to me. I'll sell out my entire family for Turkish delight. So that's the idea of overindulgence. I'm in a foreign country, and so I'm just taking it all in. A cruise ship is probably the best example we have in our time, because I've never been on one, but everyone I talk to says, I ate too much. That's always the first thing that comes out when I hear people going on a cruise, because everything's free. There's always served 24 hours, and you just eat, and then you go watch something, and you go sit around the pool, then you eat some more, and then you go on a tour, and then you come back and eat. And so there's just this idea of overindulgence. That was surface. I'm in a foreign place, and so I tend to lose my inhibitions because I'm not in a place where I'm used to. And so this food kept you from overindulging. It was just what you needed and just the right amount that you needed it, right? It's not manna. Manna was sustaining but bland. This is fruit. This is herbs. This is food. This is just the right amount to keep you from overindulging. And it also is the idea of that fever of the world, that idea that I just got to have more. Again, this is perfect. This fruit keeps you from overindulging. So you get the picture of this peace all around them, a season of healing, support, perfection in so many ways. On either side of the river was also a meadow curiously beautified with lilies, and it was green all year long. In this meadow they lay down and slept, for here they might lie down safely. When they awoke, they gathered again of the fruit of the trees, and drank again of the water of the river, and then lay down again to sleep. Thus they did several days and nights. And then they sang, Behold ye how these crystal streams do glide, to comfort pilgrims by the highway side. The meadows green, besides their fragrant smell, yield dainties for them, and that he can tell what pleasant fruit, yea, these leaves, these trees do yield, who soon sell all that he might buy this field. So when they were disposed to go on, for they were not as yet at their journey's end, they ate and drank and departed. All right, let's take that last sentence. So when they were disposed to go on, for they were not as yet at their journey's end. So is this place a picture of heaven? Is this place a picture of heaven? Yes. Okay. This gathering is a picture of heaven. what we had this morning. When we meet together as believers and we rejoice around the cross of Christ and we talk of Him and we sing of Him and we learn about God and we learn about these things and we minister to each other in different ways, what are we going to do in heaven? Those things. Okay? Now what also exists here that will not exist in heaven? Tears, suffering, sin, all the distractedness, all the things that we bring in. So this is why it's not a perfect example, but it is a picture of heaven. And that's important. Okay? If you think about it that way, that frames a little bit of how you view the church and the way the Puritans view the church. Well, in the same way here these guys are walking, they get to this river, and there's a beautiful picture of heaven where they can relax, and there's this valley where they can just lay down amongst the green grass and the lilies, and it's so comfortable and it's so soft, and you just lay down and enjoy that sunlight that's implied, right? And they can sleep there because nothing's going to attack them, and apparently there's no bugs that crawl into your ears at night while you're sleeping out in the cold, which is one of the reasons why I never go camping. And so it's just a beautiful place where they can just chill, and when they wake up they just pick some more fruit and they eat it, and it's just, everything is just relaxed, right? And there's nothing to bother them, and there's nothing to fear, and everything's provided, and it's just they can take rest. But as Bunyan says, this is not the journey's end. So while it's a picture of heaven, it's not the real thing.
Sorry, there's no protein.
Bob, you don't,
Steak.
beyond meat, man. Beyond meat. We're graduated past that now. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just looked back, didn't I? A live example right
I know. I prefer my food to have parents as well, but yeah, this is. But you get the picture. The idea here is that there's everything's provided, overabundantly, sweetly, and everything else. But nonetheless, it is just a stop along the way. Okay, it's just a stop. It's not the journey's end. There's time to go, and once again, this is again important. God says, "Keep walking," and what do? They kept walking. Here's this beautiful place, and who wouldn't want to stay in this place? And yet they know that's not the journey's end. So until the journey's end, they're not allowed to stop. They were given some rest. They were allowed to recuperate and everything else. But when it came time to go, what did? They went. Do you see any complaining about, oh, it's time to go? Nope. There's no bargaining. We just talked about Abraham trying to bargain with God to get Lot out of Sodom. What do? No bargaining. They just kept going. They ate and drank and departed. Now let's set up next week, because we don't have time. Now a little before them, there was on the left, too far, sorry. Now I beheld in my dream that they had not journeyed far, but the river and the way for a time departed, at which they were not a little sorry, yet they durst not go out of the way. This is where things start to get a little tough, okay? They walked through the valley of ease. They ran into Demas. They rejected Bians. Then they rejected Demas and the silver mine. Then they learned their lesson from Lot's wife. You see the theme that they've had to fight. They keep fighting covetousness. They keep fighting this world. They keep fighting all the things that appeal to their flesh. They keep fighting the things that they know they shouldn't go after. They stay on the path. They keep walking on the path. And so God gives them the rest from all these battles in this valley. Right? And they were not a little sorry to see it go. Because now they're coming out from this nice, perfect, wonderful, easy time, and they're getting back into real life. Right? The battles have started again. And so now they didn't go out of the way, though. They kept walking. Now the way from the river was rough, and their feet tender by reason of their travels. So the souls of the pilgrims were much discouraged because of the way. Wherefore still they went on, but they wished for a better way. So what's now taking place as they continue to walk? Okay, but stop. You went one step too far. What was happening? It got difficult. It got difficult. They were fighting Bians. They had to deal with his nonsense. They got to the silver mine, had to reject that temptation. They got to Lot's wife, they had to reject that temptation to go back and remember that lesson. Then they get to this nice, beautiful, easy plain to rest and recuperate, and then God brings challenges. Look at the path. Now the way from the river was rough, and their feet tender. So what was happening?
Oh, I think Lindy and her friends were a post-graduation trip to Scotland, and they were hiking across.
Okay.
And they called back and related, well, this is harder than we thought. We've got blisters all over our feet. Apparently the Brits, when they do this, they have somebody pick them up at the end of the day, and there's camp on the trail. And they go over to a B&B, and then they come back to the trail the next day.
Oh, I like that British. That's a good practice. That's the way I told Laura I go camping.
I mean, so yesterday I talked to her, and finally they persevered. They shortened it a bit, but eventually I had to get calluses on their feet. But there were 3-4 days of walking 40 miles a day with 40-pound cats that their feet were
Yeah, see, that's just dumb. Don't do that. I told Laura that's why we'll go camp as long as it ends up in a hotel. I got no problem with camping. But yeah, that's exactly the idea. But the idea here is they were walking on the path, Now this section of the path is extremely rocky. They're having to climb. They're having to lift themselves up. It's not just walking. It's fighting your way through it, right?
That's what I was asking her about, because we've done plenty of backpacking around here.
Right. What was the terrain like?
But they had both to go through marshy areas where their feet would get wet and the socks.
Ew.
And then they came out, and I mean, I picture Scotland as rolling hills with green grass, and you think maybe there's just there were rocks and rough places that they had to put their wet, sloshy feet on.
So that's the terrain, right? So they're having to battle their way through it. It's not just simply walking; it's hiking. It's forging your way through. It's maybe like Princess Bride, where you're cutting down the vines as you try to climb through the jungle, right? We're looking for the ROUSs all the time, trying to fight the fire swamp. I mean, it could be a lot of things that you're going through. The point is, it's really, really hard, and it's a lot harder for one reason. Number one, God sovereignly placed all these challenges in the path, but why is it that much harder for them? So nice before. So let's go back now. What happened to Lot's wife? She was comfortable. I liked it back there. And so I turn around to look. Well, God gives them these great rest after battling it all out. And then He puts a little bit of trial into their life, a little bit of difficulty on the path. And what do they start to do? Look at the last phrase. They wished for a better way. Well, who created this path to begin with? So when they say they wished for a better way, what are they essentially doing? More specifically, what are they doing? Yep. And more specifically, what are they doing? I will tell you, God, what is a better way. This is not a good way, God. Let me explain it to you. This is a crummy way. I don't like this path. This isn't the path as it should be. Let me tell you, God, what the path should look like. It should be rosy. It should be green. It should be soft. It should all be downhill. I don't know how it can all be downhill, but it should always be downhill. My path, God, always is paved, downhill, and I got those little wheels on my shoes that I always see the kids at, where they can just kind of roll downhill this way, and I don't have to work that hard. And when I get tired, I just lay down on the nice green grass that's on either side of the path. That's my path, God. That's the better path, God. That's what you've created is not the good path. My way is the better path. Do you see what they've now done? By wishing for a better path, they have made themselves judge over what is good and bad. They've substituted their wisdom for God's wisdom in terms of what would be best. Why? Because God blessed them. And they got too used to the blessing and they forgot the blessor. What happened to Lot's wife? She forgot what she actually had and look back to what she used to have. She forgot what she actually has now and starts to think back, because right now it's kind of difficult and I like what I had back there. Well, they just got past coveting, and guess what they're going to do right now? They are coveting, right? Granted, they were coveting the blessing. They were coveting this beautiful land of God that they had just gotten out of. So understand that the target of the coveting is actually incredibly pure and holy. But it's coveting because it's wanting to have what God has not given me at this moment. Does that make sense? That's why coveting your neighbor's wife. It doesn't say that you didn't have your own wife. You're coveting your neighbor's wife. I'm coveting what I can't have. And it's not necessarily just a sexual thing. When you married into, you might be marrying into money. You might be marrying into prestige. So the idea of marrying into this wife, not having this wife instead of having my wife, wasn't just a sexual thing. It's also the implication of, I could have had a better life. I could have had a better family. I could have married into the Walmart fortune if she had just picked me. Right? If my family had worked out that deal to get that dowry. So it's always something coveting. It's always something that I want that I don't have because God didn't give it to me, and so I'm unsatisfied. I'm not happy unless I get that. Right? So this is what these guys want. Though that they were blessed, the idea of coveting remains because they wanted something they couldn't have. And now the fruit of this is that they wished for a better way. That's the problem. And guess what they will find? They will find a better way. Temporarily, but it will meet everything. This is what Christian will say, these famous last words that they echo in your head, right, when you say them. He will say, look, I found it just as I wanted. Amazing that he finds exactly what he's looking for. It just took a couple of detours. Okay? So we'll pick up here next week. So go ahead and, if you want to leave your notes here, bring them back either way. And then we will get through this, and then we'll probably start with the giant, the Doubting Castle, and we'll get through a couple of days of the Doubting Castle, and we'll finish it up in 2 weeks. So next week will be Bypath Meadow, Doubting Castle, and then we'll finish up Doubting Castle.